The second wave of feminism started in the 1960s, as the 60s brought a whole new era of civil rights protests. The Equal Pay Act was passed by Congress in 1963, and there was a growing interest for women's studies at the universities. There was a new interest in exposing the female perspective and women's identities, and so the feminist artists of this time set out to find different ways of portraying women and their lives. Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema was an essay written by film critic Laura Mulvey in 1975 that coined the term the male gaze. And this essay talked about how patriarchy displayed women on the screen as sexual objects. For more info about this essay, please have a look on part 1 of this series. Many of the artworks created by feminist artists in the 70s made it their mission to subvert this male gaze, and in this video I'll talk about a few of these artworks and how they subverted the male gaze. So the first artist I want to talk about is Judy Chicago. I've already made a video about her where I talk about her life and some of her most important works, so I won't go into too much detail here. I put a link to that video somewhere on the screen if I can figure out how to do that. I'm still kind of new to this whole YouTube thing. So Chicago's most famous piece was called The Dinner Party, and it was created in 1979. The work consists of 3 tables set up to form a triangle, and on the table there are 39 plates placed on the table to represent the 39 female dinner guests, and the tables are marked as from prehistory to Rome, from Christianity to the Reformation, and from American Revolution to the Women's Revolution. The plates placed on the tables are oversized and shaped in the form of either a vulva or a butterfly, and the tables are decorated with embroidered cloths that are representative of the time period of the table. So Chicago's works relates to the male gaze by the fact that she is showing the parts of women that people generally don't want to see. Women under the male gaze were often presented as this object to be looked at and desired. Mulvey said in her essay that the directors will show just parts of women to entice the male audience. The vulva featured often in Chicago's works, and this is a part of women that's often not shown as a way to entice men. As a matter of fact, it's not shown much at all. But Chicago also showed another part of women that is not often seen, which was our heritage. The dinner party consisted of crafts such as embroidery and porcelain paintings, and this is something that has been an art form created mostly by women, and therefore has often been seen as less important than artworks dominated by men. The next artwork I want to talk about is Untitled, Your Gaze Hits the Side of My Face, which is a direct critique of the male gaze created by Barbara Kruger. The piece features an image of a female bust with the text "Your gaze hits the side of my face" placed to the side. The text is made up by cutouts from another source, and so it immediately sets a rather hostile tone, as it is drawing a parallel to a ransom note. Coming from a graphic design background, Kruger often used found images in her work, often from old advertisements, and by doing so she's critiquing the ways in which women are portrayed in the media. She was also prone to using images sourced from the 40s and 50s, a time in which women's place in society was strict, and many held the belief that a woman's place was in the home. In Untitled, Your Gaze Hits the Side of My Face, we see the female being represented by a bust, a literal object, a nondescript thing that is only meant to be looked at. So that's another way of playing with this whole male gaze concept by addressing it head on. And then another way of talking about the male gaze is by just totally removing the female body from the artwork itself. Postpartum Document is a piece created by Mary Kelly between the years 1973 and 1979. It consists of 6 sections and an introduction where she goes through the development of her newborn son until he reaches the age of 6. Some of the documents she presents in the piece are, for example, charts of his food intake, drawings he produces, logs of his speech developing, as well as her own thoughts during this time. Reading her thoughts as her child grows up, we get an unfiltered view into the life of a newly become mother, and some of the thoughts she had written down were quite controversial. At one point she describes the act of taking her child out for lunch as resembling going out for a meal with a lover, but she also talks about other things such as her hopes and fears and how she must spend less time with him as she has to go back to work. Showing these unfiltered thoughts kind of shattered the illusion of what a woman and a mother should be like, and especially during this time this piece was created, Kelly took a risk of being labeled as unfit or maybe even hysterical, which is something women have been called all throughout history anytime they don't conform to expectations. Never in Postpartum Document do we actually get to see the mother, and by not showing herself, Kelly managed to mitigate this male gaze and bring forth an art piece that actually talked about women and their experiences. Another artist that also created artworks by removing the female body from the artwork itself was Cuban artist Ana Mendieta. I have a video about her where I talk briefly about her life and some of her most famous artworks, and she was a really interesting artist, so I highly recommend learning more about her. So I want to talk about Mendieta's Silhouetta series, which was a series of photographs she took featuring her body immersed in various different landscapes. Some of these photos show her actual body as it's being covered by the landscapes, but some of them only show the empty silhouette of her body, either drawn into the landscape or hollowed out. With these photographs, Mendieta is creating a feeling of emptiness. Mendieta was born in Cuba, but was sent to America as a young child to escape the dictatorship of Fidel Castro, and it was apparent she struggled growing up in the US as a Latina woman. Not only did she not fit into the rigid beauty standards of being fair and light-skinned, she also felt that she had to hide her cultural heritage. By inserting herself into the photo in the form of a hollowed-out shape, Mendieta is talking about erasure and loss, a feeling of being empty. One photo from this series featured a hollowed-out silhouette at a beach. The shape is being filled with red tempera, which resembles blood, and we can see that the silhouette is slowly being engulfed by the waves from the ocean. We can imagine how the shape is slowly being erased by the ocean coming crashing in until there's nothing left. With this piece she's talking about life, death, and returning one's body to nature. Finally, I want to talk about a series of photographs made by Cindy Sherman called Untitled Film Stills. These photographs were created between the years 1977 to 1980, in which Sherman took photos of herself recreating generic film scenes and characters. Some of the characters portrayed in her photographs are the femme fatale, the working girl, the housewife, etc. The scenes in her photographs were made to resemble film scenes from movies from the 1950s and 60s, and by doing this, Sherman brought attention to the stereotypical portrayals of women in cinema. It's important to note that these photographs are not self-portraits. Sherman spent a lot of time perfecting her wardrobe, putting on makeup and wigs to make herself represent what was shown on the screen rather than herself. These photos then became a reflection of the American perspective of women. So Sherman uses the male gaze to her advantage to bring interest to her artworks, as these scenes are recognizable to everyone, even though they're not referencing a particular film or piece of media. So that is it for today, and in my next video I'll be talking about films from today that subverts the male gaze. If you like this video and you want to see more, make sure that you like and subscribe, and I will see you again next time. Bye!